Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to your childhood. Where did it start? Where did you get into science fiction and fantasy and all of that kind of stuff?
I mean, hard to pinpoint exactly, but there is in fact written evidence of me writing fantasy stories at the ripe old age of about 7. I think it was like grade 1. There's some crayon drawings and written, like we were supposed to write a book. I forget if they were given topics or not, but I was definitely hedgehog, knights, and dragons, and really terrible drawings because I was 7, but even more terrible spelling. Also because I was 7, but also because I was still like, I would write letters backwards and totally make up spellings for things that I didn't know. Very creative spelling, really. And my mom kept it for ages, and then she gave it to me right around the time I started publishing. And so I've got it. I should have dug it out and brought it to show. That's but cool. It's on I've got pictures of it on my website if anyone wants to go check it out.
Nice. Wow. All the way back to the beginning. Your back catalogue goes all the way back.
Yeah. goes way back. And luckily I had a school that offered up projects like that, so I actually was able to do something with it. But pretty much anytime someone asked me to write a story, there would be some kind of magic or magical creature involved. Like I don't think I've ever tried to write nonfiction on purpose, and even when I write fiction, it's pretty much always speculative.
Did you read a lot of that kind of stuff growing up? Because whenever I talk to people, they start, whether it's C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or someone else, they kind of read all of the local library of that kind of stuff. Were you doing that when you were growing up?
I was, although honestly, the stuff I read, so at first, my parents read to us, right? And I remember my mom reading The Count of Monte Cristo to us.
Oh, wow. Okay, stop.
At like age 8 or 9 or something, like way too young by most people's standards, I think. But I loved it. And she, I think, omitted sections. I've read it multiple times since then. And I remember she covered every major plot point, including some of the horrible ones. But not, there's nothing really that graphic in that book. It's all just very dark in terms of actual plot, but not that much. It's not that much is described viscerally, right? So anyway, yeah. And then I'm sure I started reading fantasy stuff. I know I read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books around the age of 10. Definitely read The Hobbit at the age of 10. Might not have picked up the actual Lord of the Rings trilogy until I was like 11 or 12, but something around there. But in my head, always, from just like seeing probably Disney movies and other sort of more fantastical stuff, and maybe reading fairy tales and stuff, there were always fantasy elements in the stories in my head. I really desperately wanted magic to be real as a kid, a lot, and then I still do, and so now I just make it real in books.
Role play, so yeah.
Yeah, but that's so I don't actually know. I can't remember though. I don't think The Hobbit was the first fantasy thing I read, but I honestly couldn't tell you what was. I mean, probably fairy tales, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure. I know that The Hobbit is probably the first thing that I like sat down myself to read and really remember reading. But I also read some Dragonlance stuff around that same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Twilight and all of that stuff. And
all that stuff. Yeah. And I honestly, the chronology of it, it was long ago and far away. And I know as soon as I dove in, I just dove in hard and I read like as much fantasy stuff as I could get my hands on. So it's hard to pinpoint. I don't really remember.
Did you read the Twins trilogy from Dragonlance as well? The kind of
maybe sounds vaguely familiar. I actually didn't read that much Dragonlance. I think I read about 3 or 4 Dragonlance books, and then I jumped into Forgotten Realms.
Yeah,
but that was later. That was as a teenager. I'm not sure what filled in there. It's so hard because I don't have most of those books anymore. I have a lot of the books that I've read over the years, but I think I only started holding on to them in my late teens. And so everything I read up until then was either a library book or borrowed from somebody. And so I don't have a record really of like what I read. It's a shame Goodreads wasn't a thing at the time. It's like the only reason I ever remember what I've read these days.
Yeah, it's good for keeping track, if nothing else. I kind of
That's
look
what I
back.
mean. As a reader, keeping track of the books that I have read, I love it. That
Yes.
is all I'm talking about.
Yes. I don't do the other stuff. Like some people say, do you read your own reviews? I'm like, no way. That just lies to madness. So
I definitely did at the start, but I have eased my way out of it.
Yeah, it's just asking for trouble. You're never going to be happy whatever someone says, and it's not a two-way conversation, so you can't do anything about it. You know.
No.
Yeah.
I do like to read the 5 stars that cross my feed. You know, sometimes somebody posts on Twitter and they tag me in a review and it's glowing and I'm like, yay, that makes me happy. You know, I don't mind those, but I try to keep myself out of Goodreads. Except I do check the number of ratings I have just to see, like, you know, how many people are actually reviewing the book after they read it, because it's a helpful marketing measure in some respects. But yeah. And just like, do I need to do a giveaway and try to get people to review the books more? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's always one of these questions, you know, how much marketing and PR do you need to go? So given that we kind of hinted at it, so when did you start actually writing your own novels? Did you start?
Well,
really
there was
young?
there was that hedgehogs and knights and dragon things, right? Yeah. So I did start very young. It's pretty much as soon as I could put crayon to paper.
Did you get initiated for that one, you know?
Not so much. And I'm not sure I should. But so the first time I started penning stories with the intention of publishing those specific stories was in my early 20s. I had started basically at around 13. I decided I wanted to be a writer professionally. Like I had a teacher, English teacher, who read some of my short stories and said, "Have you ever considered becoming a writer?" And I said no, because I'd literally only received criticism of my spelling up until that point. No one had ever told me that I was good at crafting a story, but she did. And as soon as I was considered it a possibility, nothing else was what I wanted to do anymore. So that remained at the top of my list of professions I want from that point on. But I quickly realized, like, okay, well, you know, making a go of being a professional writer as your only job is a thing that may never actually happen. So what are the other things I also want to do? And so, you know, I pursued other stuff too. But then at the end of university, I started writing with submission in mind.
Right.
Really, you know, like I'd written a bunch of short stories before that, and I'd started probably a dozen novels that I'd abandoned over the years. But I didn't sit down and say, okay, I want to write this thing, and then I'm going to try to submit it to something, until I was at the end of university. And then in my first year teaching, I actually submitted some stories. And I got a handful of rejections and a handful of, well, 2 really, publications in some short fiction mags. And one of which I remain very proud of, the other of which, that magazine was just a complete, they paid in author copies, right? Which, when it's your very first publication, you're like, okay, great, thanks, I'll take my author copies. And yeah, like, still a professional publishing credit, I'll take it. But it was a bit of a junk show. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't ever want to publish with you again. And I had a really stark contrasting experience, because the other mag that I dealt with was so professional and wonderful. And they made me, like, I did a bunch of big changes. It wasn't just like a writer ego thing, like, oh, these people love my story and this person didn't, because it was actually kind of the opposite of that. But it was just that these people treated me with a lot of respect, even while asking me to make major changes. And this person sort of treated me like dirt, even while not doing that much to the story itself, except making a few changes that were absolutely against the voice. And it was just weird anyway, and without asking, and very awkward time. So I learned a lot with just those 2 submissions. But then I sort of stopped submitting for a while. Like I would submit periodically short stories. And got a number of personalized rejections back, which I also considered a win. I was like, okay, cool. The person, somebody in the editorial team actually read it and liked it enough to say, really enjoyed, this, and this. I was like, okay, proof that you actually read the story. But we just, decided to go with something else for this round of submissions. And Like, what more can you ask for? And then I got one rejection that asked me to write a novel out of the short story.
Interesting.
I'd submitted to this one magazine that was actually the one that published my first published short story, which is called The First Line. And they give 4 first lines a year. They do 1 first line per quarter, and they choose them all in advance. And there's an option, if you want, to submit for all 4 with one sort of continuing story. But you have to submit to the very first submission in order to make that, right? And then you have to have all 4 stories already ready.
Yeah.
And I'd written this story that worked with those. And so I did that, and I submitted all 4. So it was probably around 10,000-ish words. And the rejection was very nice. It was like, got these, really enjoyed them. I don't think we're going to go forward with them for the magazine, but I would love to see what happens if you turn this into at least a novella.
Wow. Okay.
And then would you submit it and consider publishing it with our small press? Because this place that runs a mag also has a small press. And I was like, well, that's the best rejection I've ever gotten in my life. And sure. And so then I did. And then I got a bunch of suggested edits. So essentially like his first pass was more like a beta read than an editing pass. And then I sat with those for a long time. And then I realized I was actually not that interested in the story. Like his suggestions were fine, but I'd written a male protagonist for the first time. And by the time I'd done that major rewrite and turned it into a novella and submitted it and then got everything back, I'd already started writing some other novels with female protagonists. And I was just so much more excited about writing those than I was about this one story about, the one guy I've ever written from a POV. I was just sort of like, yeah, I mean, I like the story. He's a fun-ish character, but I just cared so much more about everything else. And it kind of, I didn't decide not to, I just kind of kept putting it off. And then it just sort of fell by the wayside. And so I still have never actually submitted the full novel version of that to that editor. Although I did one more major rewrite after that, but I never even sent it to him because I couldn't stick the ending. I didn't like the way the ending worked. And then by the time I was done messing with it, I was like, I don't actually care.
Okay.
Ultimately, that's what it was. I was like, this character isn't cool enough for me to care about him. Anyway, so I went back to writing all my stories about women. And then I didn't even submit those, like straight into IndiePub. Because it just seemed so much faster. And I would retain so much more control. And the only thing I'm sad about in that entire experience is that I would love to work. I do work with a professional editor, and she's great. I love her. But I would love to work with more editors. Like I think the only thing I am sad about in doing indie is that it's expensive to hire more than one editor, right? Like, and so I hire my one editor. She's amazing. She does what she does very well. I think my work would benefit, and I would learn a lot from working with more editors in the process of a single book, or of course across multiple manuscripts. And I can't afford to do that, so I don't. And I don't think it's like super harming my books. I just think that I could probably gain a lot from it. Like I don't think my books are subpar because of it, but I do think there's a chance that that they're not as like off, knock your socks off good as they might be if I had a chance to work with multiple editors. But that's kind of it.
It's different perspectives. I guess it's the difference between having like one beta reader that you trust and like half a dozen who can give you very different. Essentially my agent is basically my beta reader now. She'll read the first draft or something, give me notes. Yeah. And I revise it based upon her professional opinion before it goes to the publisher, who then I get my editor who goes, okay, now we're going to do an edit. And I'm like, oh God, I've already done one. We do another at least one full edit. Then there's a copy edit, then there's a proofreader. So so I get kind of like two, but I don't have any other beta readers. So it's different. So it must have been quite an uphill, to jump straight into indie pub and like you're doing the writing, but now got to learn all this other stuff as well, like managing essentially your own business. You're the head of your own little corporation, you know, and you've got to run the whole thing. So that must have been a lot to kind of absorb.
It's a lot. I have to say, so two benefits from my background are that one, my parents are both entrepreneurs. And so I grew up learning how to run a business in a lot of ways, just from being around them and helping out with random stuff at various points. And also just having, you know, living examples of people running their own business was sort of like, okay, this is manageable. This is a thing that can be done. Two people I know well who are similar to me have done it. So it's sort of like, it felt more achievable that way. And then, ADHD, I think, helps. I can hyper focus on the task. So if I become interested in a process, I can learn a lot about it fairly quickly and devote a lot of time to it. And when I started publishing, I had no offspring. And so I had a lot of time, just had a dog to look after. And at the time, I wasn't even like working a different day job. I just sort of jumped into having indie publishing being my day job. Because my husband he wanted to lure me up to Manitoba. We'd been living in Arizona and he was trying to get me to move back to his hometown, ish. Winnipeg's not really his hometown, but around here. And he was like, hey, what if we moved to Manitoba? I could work in the film industry full-time and you could write full-time. And I was like, well, when you put it like that,
that sounds very appealing.
I'll move literally anywhere, including Winnipeg. And so, so we did. And it has worked out fairly well so far. Having a child definitely complicated things, but so I had a lot of time to put into those pieces, the learning how to do everything else in the publishing back end. However, I would still say I haven't really mastered marketing. I have a lot of work to do there still, and it changes constantly. So it's not like, even in the few moments I felt like, okay, I've really got this thing down. It's like 3 months later, like, I don't have it down anymore. The algorithms have changed. I don't know what works. And so I've had, lots of ups and downs there. But in terms of the back end of everything else, I've just gotten better and better at formatting books and publishing them through the various distributors, and lining up advanced reader copies, and to cover design, which I started off hiring, like paying a lot of money for other people to do, and then wound up taking over myself as I learned how to do it. I did not dive into that one thinking, oh yeah, I can do my own covers. I dove into that thinking I should absolutely not ever do my own cover. And I ran a Kickstarter for a lot of money just to avoid that, so I could hire a very professional illustrator who did this amazing full cover illustration for Blade's Edge, along with my editor and everything else. And then I also hired designers to do the text layout and everything. Like, I paid people to do everything with that first one. And then I slowly started taking over those pieces myself. I suddenly, I messed around with a lot of graphic design just to do promotional stuff. And then I learned I was actually okay at it once I learned the basics. And then I started, for my second book, I still paid someone else to do the illustration, same person, same artist. And then I went ahead and did the text for the text treatment for the cover. And I thought it did all right. And then I learned more and I fixed it and it looked even better. And then I kept learning, kept improving my tools, started selling covers to other people. And then eventually got to the point where I actually did a redesign and did all the covers myself. So these ones are all artwork it's photo composite. I can't draw this well. But I did these and people seem to really like them. I get lots of compliments on the covers. And it's also led to more people hiring me for cover work for their books. So I think I did okay. But it was very nerve-wracking to do that myself, because I have always thought covers are not what I do. I always hire someone else to do covers, and then doing it myself felt like cheating and weird. Even though people now pay me to do their covers, I still am like, can't do mine. That's not right.
Yeah, it's different when it comes to your own stuff. It feels weird. It feels weird. Yeah. So did you start with your urban fantasy novels first? Did you do them first?
No.
And then these?
No, so I in terms of covers, or just in terms of writing?
So in terms of writing them.
In terms of writing, yeah. So I wrote Blade's Edge was the first book I published. It was not at all the first book I wrote. I think it was like the 8th book I wrote, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's the first one I was like, this is good enough to actually publish. So I, worked on that. This was the one I kickstarted, and thank goodness. It was so nice to actually start off in the black with that. Like you were talking about running your own business. Kickstarter is great for that if you can run a successful one. I published this book and was not in debt, and was instantly like, any sales on this book are always profit, because I paid for everything with that Kickstarter. So that was amazing. And then I wrote this second book, which is, they both can be read as standalones, but this one is a direct follow-up to this one. It will make more sense if you've read Blade's Edge, but you'll know the characters better, but it can be read technically on its own. And this one is dark enough. Like both of these together were dark enough that when I finished, I needed to write something really light and humorous. And so that's when I wrote the Victoria Marmot series, which is a fast-paced, funny, or meant to be funny. I hope it's funny. Some people find it funny, some people don't.
Please, everyone.
Humor, yeah, no, and I don't try. And this is a very niche. Like I honestly wrote this and was like, this will never sell. This is very specific to my sense of humor. No one else is going to find this funny, and I'm actually surprised at how many people do find it funny. It's not like millions of people are reading it, or even thousands. In fact, I think only a few hundred people have read this series, but that's a few hundred more than I honestly expected after I wrote it. I was just sort of like, this is for me to laugh off everything dark that happened in those other 2 books. And then when I came back with Sairō's Claw, which really is a standalone compared to, it's actually the kickoff of a new series. It's not really a standalone, but it definitely doesn't, you don't have to read either of the other 2 books set in the same world in order to read this, because it's a new cast of characters and set in a slightly different time period. But this, I was like, I gotta mesh both. Like I can't just write the dark stuff anymore. Like it was, real life has mirrored the darkness too much lately. And so I have to embrace the lighter pieces to it. There are always dark themes. There are even dark themes in the humorous urban fantasy. Like I can't get away from that. I prefer the conflicts that are sort of large scale, and I like dealing with darker issues like systemic oppression and corrupt regimes, and like these are things that come up repeatedly because we see them so much in the world, and I really love the idea of people pushing back against it. But it is not, I can't do the darker dive of like things are really terrible and these characters are really struggling, and there's always hope at the end, but it's sort of like, I mean, Trader's Hope even has hope in the name, right? But it starts off pretty grim. And so I just like needed a break from that. And I think, I don't know how long it'll last that I won't be able to write anything darker, but there's still a bunch of really big, heavy themes in this, but it is definitely more of a like fast-paced action adventure that touches on that stuff, but the people in it are doing okay.
Tell me about the world that it's set in. What sort of things did you want to pull in? Because when I'm building a fantasy world, I start thinking about all the elements, not just the characters, but whether I want to have magic or not, whether I want to have technology, whether I have non-human races, and then start thinking about themes. So what were you building at the beginning? So
Gensokai starts off being deeply inspired by feudal Japan. I was living in Japan when I wrote Blade's Edge, and that's the first book that's set in that world. And I originally was like sparked by the world around me living in Japan. I would go for these hikes all the time, and at the top of it, every single summit in Japan pretty much has a little shrine to something, some local spirit. And so I was sitting next to one day, and it was like a little dragon. And I was just sitting there wondering, like, what would happen if that dragon came to life and then just was like, human, what do you want? Like, what would I do in that scenario? And wouldn't it be cool if that were a thing? And then I lived in an area that also had a lot of, I mean, I don't think you can get to a part of Japan that doesn't have a lot of samurai history, but there was a lot of it still left standing, unlike a lot of places in Japan, where they didn't tear quite everything down in the Meiji Restoration. And so there were museums, there were a lot of places to visit that had that. And so I just sort of wanted, I got to experience a little bit of that feel, just the feudalism, what this armor looks and feels like, all this other stuff, just like these little pieces that I sort of wanted to bring to life. And so that was the kernel of inspiration. And then in my head, this world started taking shape that had previously been very progressive, but was for various historical reasons now deeply misogynistic. I wanted that to be a part of the regime that was in charge. And then thinking about the ways in which that worked, I definitely wanted there to be magic. I pretty much always want there to be magic. I think I mentioned earlier, right? Like, this is anytime I have a story idea, it's like, I want magic to be real. So magic is going to be real in this story. And people know about it. It's not just real; it's also known.
Okay.
But it's very limited by this regime, right? Even though that's not how it actually works, right? But they're trying to push square pegs into round holes because that's how oppression often works, right? So that was the part of the theme and part of the world building too, right? Like, okay, so there's all this magic, but it's not being used, I don't want to say properly, because the whole point is maybe that there isn't a proper use, but it's not allowed to be the living, thriving thing it's supposed to be.
Right.
And that's part of the problem, right? So then that small thing, which just is so almost tangential in the first two books, becomes a massive piece of this second series, the series that I'm starting now. That I don't want to say misuse, but that mishandling of magic and power becomes massively important in this next series. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about it lately, and that's really exciting. And so I'm doing a lot of world building now, but also I'm zooming out. So Ginsokai, for various reasons, thinks that they are alone in the world through the first two books. And in this third book, it's not a massive spoiler or anything to say that the subtitle for the series literally translates as "outside Ginsokai," and it's or overseas from Ginsokai. We get to see that there are actually other places in this world, and that's a lot of where the Earth parallels kind of stop. Also, so whereas Ginsokai was heavily inspired by feudal Japan, the other nations that I'm creating are less directly inspired by any other specific culture and more inspired by just like what might a world be like. And there will still be some random parallels, either intentional or accidental. Some of them are accidental already. I've been creating this group of people that or this culture that really is closely entwined with nature for a lot of reasons that are spoilers, so I can't talk about those. And then just like a number of things that have happened, or a number of ways that their culture works, when I was just like, okay, brain, how would a society function if these were the parameters, have accidentally, I have found in conversations with some Indigenous friends of mine, mirrored a lot of Indigenous cultures. And I was like, that's completely coincidence, but also really cool. But now I have to be really careful with that, because I have to make sure that I'm not mimicking any cultural practices that are important. So I'm going to have to actually do a bunch of research to avoid making that the same, because it's not meant to be. But it's cool that there's a lot of parallels. And because I was trying to come up with like a really awesome, progressive, naturally, like in tune with nature type of culture. And so the idea that that's what I came up with is really not surprising if I think about it, but it was not what I was trying to do. Anyway, I was really trying to come up with this original, like the people are, I can't talk about it without.
No, it's okay. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. So
yeah, no, I'm not spoiling, but yeah. So
how much do you plan there? Obviously, you talk about doing some research and things there and thinking about different races. But are you Do you make a lot of it up as you go, or do you plan a lot, or where do you fall on the spectrum of planning versus not planning?
So that's a good question. In terms of story, I'm very much a make it up as I go, because I get bored otherwise.
Interesting, right?
I fix a lot in revisions, but I absolutely, if I know exactly what's happening in the plot, I don't want to write it. I'm like, I know what happens. I don't need to watch this show in my head.
Right.
It's true. It's just the way my brain works. I'm like, that's been there, done that. No thanks. So what I do is a very loose idea of the like plot points, but what I dive deep into is world building and character building. And so I do a ton of notes on world building. Like I have, from all 3 books in Gensokai, I have easily 100,000 words of just notes.
Wow, okay.
And the books themselves are all like, well, the first 2 are around 100,000 words, and the third one was like 120 something, 125, 127, something like that. But yeah, so it's not like, but I do a lot. But it's also very like stream of consciousness notes. Like I'm just like typing out ideas, and then like, and what would happen if I did this? Okay, then this and this and this, and then what about this? Okay, and now I have to figure out this, and it's like that's literally the words I'm writing is like, and now I have to figure out this. And so when I say it's hundreds of thousands of pages of notes, I don't want anyone to think it's like these very carefully crafted notes on world building. I wish it was. It'd be much easier to find things afterwards, but that's not how my brain works. But I can at least do word searches when I need to. It's like, okay, what did I say about the Adadi, like, capital city? And like, so I type in, if I put in Adadi and capital, I can probably find it pretty quickly with Scrivener, thankfully. But yeah. My brain is in a weird place, and so are my notes. But I do a lot of world building notes and a lot of character notes. And I ask myself these questions about characters, and it almost always solves any writing problem I have. Like if I ever run into writer's block, like if I get stuck somewhere, the very first thing I do is go to my character sheets and ask myself more questions about the character's background.
Right.
And that pretty much always fixes it. My brain will always supply, well, there's this thing from their past. I'm like, oh yeah, that explains this and this and this, probably explains that future thing that hasn't happened yet, and definitely enables me to now move forward in this direction. It's just like everything comes down to character choices for me when I get stuck. So that being the case, I do a lot of world building notes and a lot of character notes, and very little plotting. The plot tends to take care of itself once those pieces are in place. And then it's sort of like the reason I enjoy it, the reason I love writing so much is because at that point it turns into putting these characters into this world and sort of like dropping them into the scene and being like, okay, what happened? What did these people do when they were put in this situation? And then I've transcribed that as I watch it play out in my head. And that's how I write books.
Everyone's got the process, so as long as it works, I always say to people, it doesn't matter how you get to the end of that first draft, you just got to get there. That's the thing. As you said, you started a number of books and never finished them. And that's the thing the trap that so many people fall into is 20, 30, 50,000 words. And I'm not happy with this one. They start another one, another one. And they just never actually finish the book. I'm like, first draft's crap. It's always crap. The story gets better once you've finished writing it.
Yes. And I do a massive rewrite before I let anyone else see it. And I fix a lot of those issues that are often showstoppers otherwise later. I leave so many notes to myself. They're like, this doesn't make sense, fix it later. But I will fly through a first draft watching the scenes play out in front of me. And then the second draft is all about deepening character and world building. And lately it's been really about hitting voice, getting voice right and getting it down to the little details for every character on the page if I can. Right. And that part I actually enjoyed so much this last time. That was actually surprising. Like I don't always enjoy rewrites that much. Like I usually enjoy them some, but I enjoyed this one so much. I rewrote every word in every scene for the entire book of Sairō's Claw.
Wow.
Even when I didn't change anything in the scene in terms of plot. I just rewrote them all once I had got to know the character. I knew the characters so much better by the end of the first draft than I had known them at the beginning, even with all the character notes that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so my rewrite was entirely going in and just deepening choices, just like making those characters' choices really come from within, really clarifying voice, adding more banter that fit their personalities better, just all that stuff. And for the first time, I had a lot of fun doing that. Like, wasn't just like, okay, like often I consider a revision like it's fun because it's puzzle. It's like you have to like figure out how to take what you wrote and then twist it and turn it and change it and make it actually fit together as a cohesive. Now this is a book that people will actually want to read. And the puzzle of getting from draft one to that is always entertaining because it's a puzzle and I like puzzles. But this was, I actually like really got into enjoying the craft of like choosing the right words and making people's dialogue come through and their twitches, the little physical things that they do and all of that. Like I really focused on that a lot in this book, more than I ever have. And I really love the results of it. And a couple reviewers have said they like that too. So I'm stoked about that. But I don't know if anybody else will notice, but I'm happy.
It's that thing of you start at the beginning with all the notes and the idea of what the book is and who the characters are, and then you get to the end and look back at the beginning, which is the furthest point, and you go, yeah, that's not right, and then you're able to kind of course correct. But it's trying to explain that to people who've never finished a book is the struggle. They're just like, well, how do you know? I'm like, you don't know always until you get to the end, and then you go, oh yeah, of course that's not right, and you go back and fix it. That's how it works,
Yeah, totally. And sometimes it also happens in conjunction with like getting to the end of the book and being like, oh, what I thought was the beginning is actually the middle, or what I thought was the middle is actually the beginning. And now I have to go back and turn the last 50,000 words into 100,000 words because it turns out that whole first part didn't need to be in this book. That's one of the, I don't know, I always find that surprising, but it keeps happening.
One of the best things I've found is meeting other writers, talking to other writers, because they get it. I always say there's muggles and then there's writers, and you can talk to certain people, your friends and your family, about books and writing, and they're very sympathetic and and after a certain point they're just like, oh God, shut up. But you talk to another writer and they get it. So I went to convention, my first one in 2 years, about a month ago. And we all just sat around moaning and talking about things. And everyone got it. And I love that. I miss that so much.
It's so good.
So do you have writers that either locally or now, I guess, through the internet that you do that kind of stuff with?
Oh, almost entirely through the internet these days. There are, of course, local writers. I am a terrible hermit when it comes to actual activities. It's funny, like I love camp, I love getting out of the house, but only to disappear into the woods. I don't actually like to get out of the house and go spend that much time with other people, except on rare occasions. Actually, I've got a Comic-Con coming up. If it actually happens, they haven't sent us much information yet. It's supposedly happening. Tickets are on sale. There's no call for it to be canceled, I think, in terms of public health, but they've been a little cagey about details. So I don't know what's going on with that, but if it happens, that'll be really nice. Those are mostly to talk to readers though. This particular convention is very much I'm going to run a table to sell books, and I'll be spending a lot of time talking to folks walking by wearing awesome cosplay, which is my favorite. I love to watch people in cosplay. It's so cool. I love asking people about their cosplay and having them answer. And that's really what I spend the majority of the weekend doing. And then sort of incidentally, those people buy books. Which works out. And then my favorite moments are when someone comes back on the second day because they bought a book on the first day and they read it all overnight. And then they come back to buy the rest of the series and tell me how much they loved it. Those are like the best. But really it's just about hanging out with fellow nerds and talking nerd things. And complimenting people's cosplay, which is very nice. But that one's not a writer's convention. We have a more writerly convention here in the spring. I think it's usually over May long. And that's nice. But honestly, like the authors I'm closest to are online writer friends at this point. The SPFBO 5 finalists, we still check in with each other every day in our group chat, which is awesome. I have a few writer friends I play Dungeons and Dragons with these days, virtually.
Cool. Sounds cool. Yeah, tell me about your writer friends that you talk to. What
My
kind of
writer
stuff
friends, yes.
do you bitch about and talk about? And is it plot? Is it character? Do you help each other
It's
out, or do you just kind of whinge about things
everything.
and struggles and
All of the above. We help each other out. So like it's like whatever people have time for. So usually like one of us will jump on the chat and be like, hey, I got this thing that I need somebody to read. Does anyone have time? And whoever has time will say, hey, I got time, send it to me. And that's anything from short stories to chapters from serialized novels to just like, oh, the entire book is done and I need a beta reader. Does anybody have time for that? And we'll ask, and we totally understand, like, if people don't have time to actually read it. But it's like, I think for a lot of us, it's our first stop to be like, hey, I need another writer to read this. And so there's that, but there's also the moaning marketing and reviews and the readers who are sending emails to us that are letting us know their very detailed thoughts about our work and how we secretly feel about that, which, anyway, so all that, all the things we talk about, all of it, and we are there to provide moral support for each other or help if necessary. Sometimes someone will literally write, this is just a rant, I don't actually need advice, but like, and then a giant rant ensues, everyone reads it, says, oh yeah, that sucks, and then person's like, okay, rant over, I feel better, thanks, and so there's that, but then we do, like, we workshop stuff with each other, and we also, what's been super helpful is people, like other people in the group, having success with marketing and being able to help some of the rest of us with advice on that, and like, oh, this piece, like Amazon ads stopped working for me and I don't know what I did or what happened, and then someone knows something about that and we provide suggestions or advice, or here's this book that I read that really helped me figure that part out or whatever, and just like, it's a super useful resource. But we also just talk about life. We're just like, completely non-writing related things. And it's really nice. Anything we're excited about or sad about or whatever usually shows up in the chat, and we talk about it. It's pretty good.
Do you want to talk about QuaranCon?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about QuaranCon. I love
tell
talking
people
about
what QuaranCon is.
Sure. Yeah. If you don't know what QuaranCon is, I hope you'll check it out. So in March or April of 2020, everything was shutting down. The world was going into the first major lockdown for most of us. And a lot of us were sad about con season disappearing. And I luckily thought of making a form before I tweeted it out. I made a form for signups and said, would anybody be interested in organizing a virtual convention with me, and like, who would show up, who would want to do it? And I tweeted it out expecting maybe like a dozen people to respond, and we got like 200 people interested just right off the hop. And when I then sent out a follow-up question, actually I think in the first form I said, would you be willing to help organize? Yes, no, maybe. And if so, what? And that was on the original form. Again, patting former me on the back for thinking of that. And so then there were like maybe 50 people who said, oh, I'd be willing to help organize, out of those 200 who first said anything. And then I emailed those 50 people and said, okay, here are the jobs that need to be done. Put your name next to one that you think you can do. And if more than one person puts their name down, great, we'll have teams, And anyway, so that was, I basically just wanted to have an SFF convention. Like, everything was getting shut down. And I was like, I miss science fiction and fantasy conventions. I had, like, the last one I'd gone to had been in the fall of 2019. And I knew people's spring season was coming up. I don't usually have a spring con season, but I still was watching a bunch of my friends being like, oh, I can't go to whatever con, And so I was like, okay, this is sad. It's making people sad. Let's try to do something. We're all home. Maybe we can make a virtual convention happen. I don't know how that works, but let's try. And so, with that many signups, I then started researching it. ADHD to the rescue. My brain was like, okay, we got to plan a convention, and we need to do it with momentum. We don't know how long lockdown's going to last. So let's make it happen. And I think, it might have been 4 to 6 weeks from when I sent out the form that we actually ran. it's like, while people are still in lockdown, while, you know, like we have our captive audience and everything. And I researched how to do interviews on Zoom and like how to get multiple people on a single screen and what I had to do for that. And turned out you couldn't do it for free, but I was like, well, maybe people will donate enough that I can pay for a pro Zoom account. It was only $20 a month and we were just doing to do it for the 1 month. So she was like, yeah, that's affordable. We can do that. I'm sure I can get people to chip in $20. Yes, I could. People are great. Anyway, so we ran and we got, I mean, I was just blown away by the people who were willing to participate. I know you were in this year's. Did you participate in 2020s as well? I can't recall.
I can't remember. Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe.
I think you were in something.
Say yes. Let's say yes.
It's so long ago, but yeah, let's say yes. You were in stuff and like just so many people that I had heard of but didn't really know personally, and then also a bunch of my friends, but even more of my like writer community friends than I had thought were actually excited about it. And then we had so many panels, and it was panels and readings and Q&As and stuff like that. The first year we didn't do any workshops. In 2021 we did some workshops as a test run. I think they worked well enough that we'll do them again next year. And next year we're going to have a con, hopefully not because anyone's actually in lockdown, but just because it's a nice way to have all of us get together virtually. But we're still planning on doing something. So yeah, so if you're watching this and you love hearing authors talk about writing in various ways, I had hoped to have not just authors. I was like, oh yeah, maybe we'll get some like comics people and movie people and whatever else. And we've not really gotten a lot of that in the main show, but we do have one comic book writer who has come both years, and is apparently quite a big deal. But I'm not into comics enough that I knew who he was off the top of my head. But like I looked at the issues he's written, huh?
Do you want to say who it was? Or is?
If I could remember his name, I absolutely would. But this is where I'm like, my memory is terrible, and That's he's not, yeah. Hopefully he's not watching and doesn't find this to be a slight.
It's fine.
But yeah. Anyway, but but yeah, just like all that stuff, and I mean, people who are much bigger names than I expected to be at all interested in a random tweet of mine that was like, maybe let's make a convention. People are like, yeah, like, okay, great, amazing, thank you for showing up. And then they came back and did this year's as well, and like, it's been so cool. So yeah, if you want to see panels that involve some of your absolute favorite fantasy and science fiction authors, and you want to like learn about how their process is or what they consider while world building and deciding what food goes into a book and all kinds of stuff. Like the topics are many and varied. There's hours and hours of totally free panels and Q&As and readings and stuff for y'all to watch. And in addition to that, I do CornCon Cubed, which is CornCon continuing content, which is why it's Con Cubed. And that is an interview series where I do much what Stephen does here. I just talk to authors or other people. I've interviewed one physicist. I have plans to interview some artists, and I don't know if I'll ever get a movie type person on, but those types of things. It's just like one-on-one interviews that are very long and rambling, but are pretty good fun, I think. And we do those all year long. And I've had Stephen on, so if you just want more quality Stephen content, you should come find that interview.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants even more.
Hey, if people are here, it's probably because they want that. So,
well, I'll put some links into down below to previous years so people can check out that and
totally
keep an eye out for future stuff as well.
Thank you. And they should also go click on your interview. Put that link in too.
If they're really bored, go and check that out. So, book 3, 2.5-ish, 3, Sairō's Toys out.
Yes.
Now I'll put a link down below to your website as well so people can check all that stuff out. So what's next? What are you working on next then? Book.
Currently working on the next. I'm working on the next one of these.
Okay.
I'm reluctant to say I'm working on it because it feels like I haven't worked on it in 2 weeks. My daughter's been home with a cold and I haven't written. But right before that, I had churned out like 15,000 words of notes for this puppy.
Mm-hmm.
And even started writing some scenes, which was very exciting. I think I've written, I actually wrote a good over 10,000 words of what happens in the next book while I was writing Sairō's Claw.
Okay.
In order to make sure I knew what happened, so that I could make enough foreshadowing happen. And this one, I was like, I need to at least know how that next starts and who these people are. So I did that, and now I've also added probably another 10,000 words to that. So, so that's a good start. But it'll probably be, Sairō's Claw clocked in at, I want to say 127. I can't remember if that's right.
Yeah.
This next book will be at least that long, probably. And I don't know right now. I don't know if this will just be a duology and it'll be this book and that book, or if there'll be a third or even a fourth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. Because as I mentioned, discovering as I go.
Yep.
There's a very large war that we have to deal with. That's also not really a spoiler. I mean, yeah. Okay. It's because it's so large, and yeah. So I don't know how many books it'll take to resolve. And I don't know if the war will happen or if the resolution will be trying to make it not happen. So really not a spoiler at all. It's like there might be war. That I feel like you can say that safely about almost every fantasy book.
True. Yeah.
Certainly everything that falls into the epic category. Yeah. So I don't know, but I'm working on it now. It's been very fun to get back into working on it. I'm really hoping my daughter can go back to school soon so I can get back to it, because it's been really cool to dive back into that world and start figuring things out. And I'm going to really try hard not to hang up on you as I do this. There we go. But yeah, it's been nice getting to play in that world with those characters. I really love katanas. I just got to throw that out there right now. One of the main reasons I wanted to write in a world inspired by feudal Japan is because those are my favorite swords. I'm just like, man, I want to write a bunch of fight scenes that use katana. Like, that's the coolest. And so there are those, although we've now mentioned, you asked earlier, long ago, about whether I do magic or whether I do tech. And the Gensokai books were very much magic heavy and tech low, right? Okay. But as Gensokai reemerges in a world that it has been sort of sequestered from for about 1,000 years, tech might become more of a thing that people have to deal with at some level. And so I'm still sorting out actually what levels of tech are there, but I love the idea of magic and tech interacting and playing with that and seeing what level of each. Yeah, so that's a big part of the notes I'm working on right now, is sorting that out. What has everyone else been doing in these last 1,000 years? What's the history that I have to go through, and where does that put everybody in terms of tech and magic and culture and conflict? And it's a lot to sort out. So yeah. I think there may well be another, like, just 100,000 words of notes just for this next book, because it's going to take me a lot to sort of figure out everybody's backstories.
And that's one of the benefits is, as you said, being indie, you can work stuff out by yourself at your own pace. And then once you've got it sorted, you can start writing it and planning it and revising it, and you're not chasing a deadline set by someone. So there's definitely that.
Giving myself a lot of time this time. I keep saying this, somebody try to hold me to it. I am not setting up a pre-order on this book until I've actually finished the second draft. Yes. Which is usually my time to send it to the editor draft. So once it's in my editor's hands, then and only then will I set an at least 6-month lead time pre-order. And only if I feel really confident in that she's not going to need to do too much to it. And if not, I'll wait till I get it back. I'm just I'm not going to do that to myself again, because I trap myself in a way that gets, it's not good for my mental health. I'm like, panic, must finish book now, ignore all the rest of my life and just, and it's certainly productive in terms of sort of cracking the whip at myself and making a book happen, but it winds up, it's not a good work-life balance for me. So
okay, well,
I'm gonna try to.
look forward to seeing what you come up with next as you progress, in this series, and how many you're going to write is, as it develops, as you said, as you find your way forward,
Yeah.
and see
as
where it
many
grows.
as the story requires is always my.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah. If you need to do more, you need to do less, you totally can.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on tonight. Thanks for telling me and everyone else about your process. I'll put links down below to everything.
Thank you so much for
check
having
out
me.
the books. And that'll be it for tonight, everyone. So good night, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye.